Senate Republicans have blocked a procedural vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill because of course they have, But this might actually be a good thing, according to David Dayen from the American Prospect. We'll get to him in just a minute. But first, some important details on what occurred today. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer pushed for a procedural vote in order to begin debate on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which, as you guys know, I have huge problems with. It appears that the bill isn't even written, but the whole point was to begin the debates on what will be in the final version of the bipartisan bill. But Senator Rob Portman, a Republican, said, no, we're not ready. We are just not ready, and we are going to block this effort. Now, in order for the procedural vote to pass, you need at least 60 senators in the Senate to vote in favor of it. Of course, we didn't have enough Republican lawmakers to do it. And so here's Senator Portman explaining why it is that Republicans blocked this bill.
They're going to go ahead with reconciliation no matter what, Joe, and they always were. And,
well, then
we understand
don't give
that.
them this too, then.
But wait a second, is that why this vote today? They want to be able to say that you didn't vote for it, so they had to go ahead with budget reconciliation?
Yeah, I mean, what they'd like to do is be able to say today that we're not supporting it. We are. We just want time to get it right. It's too important, for us to rush a vote here for an arbitrary deadline. So today, we're not going to be able to support moving forward. We will be able to on Monday, and I hope that's what the majority leader decides to do, is to put this vote off till Monday. If he doesn't, he'll offer the vote again on Monday, I believe, and we'll be ready to go.
I mean, are Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats gonna work real hard throughout the weekend and then they can vote on this on Monday? Like what? I was confused, I'm like, what is going on? Well, David Dayen did a good job breaking this down. And remember, guys, the bipartisan infrastructure bill is different from the reconciliation bill. The reconciliation bill will spend about $3.5 trillion, assuming that it passes. And it is expected to pass. I mean, I'm being very generous in the way I'm describing it, but the intention is to pass the more robust infrastructure bill as a separate standalone bill through reconciliation, which just requires a simple majority in the Senate rather than the 60 senators necessary under the legislative filibuster. So Schumer on Monday, pushed the legislative process forward, even though the bill has yet to be written, by filing a motion to proceed with a shell bill that he can later swap the infrastructure text into. On Tuesday, Schumer rejected Republican calls to slow down the process. Now, to invoke cloture, just to reiterate again, to invoke cloture and trigger hours of debate in the Senate, Schumer needs the support of 60 senators in a chamber that is divided 50-50 between Republicans and Democrats. So since we didn't have enough Republicans to vote in favor of this, they blocked it, right? Now, why is this? Like, what is the tactic? David Dayen explains, writing that, seen from one angle, the Schumer gambit of calling a vote while met with seething anger from Republicans absolutely worked. What? How? Negotiations over the final pieces of the Portman-Sinema bill, and that's the bipartisan bill, weren't going anywhere until Schumer called the vote and the bluff of Republican senators. We're now on a path where senators are talking about wrapping up next Monday. That wasn't going to happen without a deadline. So essentially what Dayen is arguing here is that Chuck Schumer smartly pushed for a tactic that would actually lead to a deadline on the negotiation process or the debate on this bill, right? So they're gonna do this vote on Monday. It's likely that they'll get the Republicans to play along. And that's good news because we need to figure out what the final, and this is important, reconciliation bill will entail. And remember, these are two bills that are supposed to kind of work together. So let me explain that. Schumer also needed to get clarity on Portman-Sinema, again, that's the bipartisan infrastructure bill, before crafting the vehicle for the reconciliation package. Right now, the package stands at 3.5 trillion, but the expectation is that if Portman-Sinema falls apart, which is still likely to happen, by the way, the new spending in the reconciliation bill would be folded in, pushing the figure to 4.1 trillion. So in other words, if Republicans are gonna stall, if Republicans are going to block the bipartisan effort to pass an infrastructure bill, Democrats are getting ready to bake in parts of the bipartisan infrastructure bill into the final reconciliation bill, which I think is smart and I think it's necessary. In fact, if it were up to me, I probably wouldn't have even bothered with Republicans to begin with. But my guess is that Democrats want to show a good faith effort in working with Republicans, reaching across the aisle. And this is their effort maybe to show Americans that it's nearly impossible to work with Republicans. They have no interest. Now, it is important to drill down the spending for the reconciliation bill. And this tactic does just that, as David Dayen explains. You have to make the headspace for that in the budget resolution, which instructs the reconciliation process with top line numbers that set the limit for spending. If the Senate passed a $3.5 trillion budget resolution, they couldn't fold in the outstanding money from the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So its fate needs to be clear ahead of the budget vote. You guys see what's happening here? So it's gotten to a point where Democrats are like, either they're gonna work with us or they're not. And this is their last chance. If they're not gonna work with us, we're moving on. And we're drafting this reconciliation bill with everything we need, including provisions from the bipartisan infrastructure bill that we'd like to include in the final reconciliation bill. Now, I do also want to just give you a little more detail into how unlikely it is that the bipartisan bill is going to pass, because they can't agree on the so-called pay-fors. How are you going to pay for it? Now, Biden said, listen, why don't we spend about $80 million on funding the IRS to ensure that they catch these high income earner tax evaders and cheats. And that is supposed to bring us a pretty significant return on the investment, at least $100 billion. But Republicans don't want that. On substance, Portman-Sinema, the bipartisan bill, has gotten worse with each passing day. First, there was the inevitable Republican pullout of the investment in IRS enforcement, a political party that has dedicated itself to starving the IRS of revenue, was highly unlikely to greenlight $40 billion for that agency. So Biden and the Democrats caved a little bit and said, okay, fine, instead of 80 million, can we do 40 million? And Republicans are like, no. Our corporate donors don't want that. They don't want to have to worry about being audited if they're, dodging their taxes or evading their taxes. And as always, conservative Democrats are serving as an obstacle because Democratic moderates are apparently so focused on getting a deal that they're allowing the GOP to chip away at the substance. And again, we're talking about the bipartisan deal. And even that hasn't guaranteed passage. So if this is a real sign that Democrats are finally on their way to passing one robust reconciliation bill that includes the private infrastructure, includes the physical infrastructure along with the human infrastructure, fantastic. But Dayen asks another question that I think is incredibly important. Are they also gonna bake in, assuming the bipartisan infrastructure bill fails, the pretty toxic and awful provisions of that bill into the reconciliation bill? Because remember, one of the things that's been floating around is the idea of selling off $100 billion worth of public infrastructure to private companies in order to raise money to pay for other infrastructure projects. I think that that's horse crap. And I don't think that they should sign on to that under any circumstance. And of course, I'm talking about Democrats here. They should reject that at any and all costs. We don't know what the final reconciliation bill is gonna look like. We don't know if the final reconciliation bill is gonna pass, even with all the provisions that we want, because we still have to deal with the Manchins and the Sinemas and the Warners in the Senate, the corporate Democrats who are bought off by the same corporate donors as the Republican senators. So while this might be a smart strategy by Schumer and maybe Democrats in the Senate are headed in the right direction, there are still obstacles in the way. And the remaining question for me is, what are Democrats gonna do to strategize? What strategy are they gonna use to apply pressure to the corporate Democrats in the Senate to ensure that every single one of them is on board to vote yes on the reconciliation bill? Until they answer that question, everything else is just fun talk. They need to get it done, and the way to do that is to ensure that Manchin, Sinema, Warner, and all the other corporate Democrats go along with what we need. And that is a robust infrastructure bill that focuses on public, physical infrastructure along with human infrastructure, like funding for healthcare, expansion of Medicare. You have money and funding for elder care, child care. These are things that we need. And if Democrats get it done, I promise you, that's gonna have a far larger impact on unity than anything else that Biden can do. So we'll see how it all plays out. And of course, we'll fill you guys in as we get the updates.